The betrayal and the exodus. The great hall of the Galactic Assembly stretched upward like a cathedral made of light and crystal. Thousands of delegates from across known space filled the ascending tiers, their bodies ranging from bipedal to serpentine to forms that defied easy description. Bioluminescent panels shifted through soft colors, responding to the emotional temperature of the room. Today those panels glowed an uneasy amber. Elena Vasquez stood at the central speaking platform, feeling very small and very alone. She was 43 years old, had spent 20 years in diplomatic service, and had never felt more certain that everything she believed about galactic cooperation was about to be proven a comfortable lie. The evidence files loaded on her display terminal. 3 months of investigation. 14 intelligence sources. Documentation that should have been impossible to obtain but had fallen into her hands through channels she would never reveal. All of it pointing to a single, terrible truth. Honored delegates. Her voice carried through the translation matrix, rendered into 1,000 languages simultaneously. I come before this assembly not to defend humanity against the charges presented, but to expose the conspiracy behind them. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. High Arbiter Thessan, a Zethrani whose silver carapace gleamed under the ceremonial lights, raised one of his 4 hands for silence. Ambassador Vasquez, you were granted speaking time to address the sanctions proposal. This is not a forum for baseless accusations. Then let me make my accusations with evidence. Elena activated her display, projecting documents into the air above the platform. These are communication logs recovered from a damaged Zethrani military vessel near the Procyon system. They detail coordination between Zethrani intelligence and Moratti trade officials to manufacture the resource hoarding charges against Earth's outer colonies. The amber light in the walls flickered toward red. Thessan's compound eyes narrowed, but his voice remained smooth. Fabricated data. Humanity has grown desperate. These are financial records from the Collective Banking Consortium. Elena continued as if he hadn't spoken. They show payments totaling 40 billion credits from Zethrani accounts to witnesses who testified against human mining operations. Payments made 3 months before those witnesses claimed to have observed any violations. More murmurs. Some delegates leaned forward with interest. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. And this. Elena's voice hardened. This is a tactical briefing distributed to Moratti fleet commanders 6 weeks ago. It details attack vectors for 3 human colony worlds. Not defensive positions. Not monitoring schedules. Attack vectors. With projected civilian casualty estimates. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted in dozens of languages. The translation matrix struggled to keep up, creating a cacophony of overlapping accusations and denials. Lies. The Moratti trade minister surged to his feet, his gray skin flushing purple with rage. Human propaganda designed to distract from their own crimes. If they are lies, then explain why 3 Moratti strike groups are currently positioned within jump distance of those exact colonies. Elena met his gaze without flinching. Explain why your ships moved into those positions during the past week, while this assembly has been conveniently occupied with your manufactured charges. Silence fell like a hammer. Even the hostile delegates seemed frozen. Elena turned slowly, addressing the full assembly. This was never about sanctions. This was never about justice. This was about stealing human territory while keeping us trapped in this chamber, unable to respond. You planned to attack our people while we stood here playing your political games. High Arbiter Thessan rose from his elevated seat. These accusations are themselves grounds for censure. The ambassador will retract her statements or face removal from the chamber. I will do neither. Elena straightened her spine. Instead, I will do something humanity should have done years ago. She touched her communication implant. Captain Morrison, this is Ambassador Vasquez. Execute Protocol Exodus. Authorization Vasquez 77 Delta. Confirmed, Ambassador. The voice crackled through her earpiece. All human vessels are breaking orbit. Evacuation of assembly station personnel begins immediately. Thessan's carapace plates shifted in what Elena had learned to recognize as alarm. You cannot simply leave during formal proceedings. There are protocols, procedures. Your protocols protected the species that planned to murder our colonists. Elena gathered her data tablets, her formal credentials, the ceremonial gifts humanity had offered upon joining the assembly decades ago. Your procedures gave cover to those who bribed witnesses and forged evidence. We trusted this institution. We believed in cooperation across species. We were fools. She began walking toward the exit. Behind her, Chaos bloomed as delegates realized what was happening. If humanity leaves this assembly, you forfeit all treaty protections. Theson's voice rose to a shout. Your colonies will have no legal standing. Your trade routes will be closed. Elena stopped at the massive doors. She turned one final time. Remember this moment. Remember that you chose this. Humanity came to you with evidence of conspiracy and you called us liars. We came with proof of planned attacks and you threatened us with censure. Her voice dropped to something cold and quiet. We will remember too. Every name on those attack plans. Every species that voted to sanction us while your allies prepared for slaughter. Every single one. The doors opened. Elena walked through. Behind her, the first reports began arriving. 3 human colonies under attack. Morati warships had jumped in system the moment humanity's main fleet was confirmed engaged in assembly space. Thousands dead in the first strikes. Orbital bombardment of civilian centers. Elena kept walking. Her hands were steady. Her heart was ice. The journey home took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of silence from assembly space, broken only by propaganda broadcasts condemning human aggression and celebrating the restoration of order to contested territories. 3 weeks of refugee ships limping toward the Sol system, carrying survivors from colonies that no longer existed. Elena stood in the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel Horizon, watching the stars slide past. Somewhere behind them, the Galactic Assembly was probably celebrating. Somewhere ahead, Earth waited with whatever remained of humanity's hope. Ambassador. Captain Morrison's voice came through the intercom. We're receiving a priority transmission from Earth. President Chen is addressing the fleet. Put it through. The holographic display flickered to life. Marcus Chen looked like he'd aged a decade in 3 weeks. His dark eyes held something Elena had never seen before in a politician. Genuine, unmasked grief. Citizens of Earth. Colonists of the outer worlds. Sailors of the fleet. His voice was raw but steady. By now you've heard the reports. The colonies at New Helsinki, Prosperity Station, and Bright Harbor are gone. 47,000 people. Murdered while we sat in that chamber, while we tried to reason with species that had already decided to take everything from us. Elena closed her eyes. 47,000. She had friends on Bright Harbor. Had attended a wedding there last year. The Galactic Assembly has issued formal statements condemning our withdrawal. They claim we abandoned diplomatic solutions. They claim we chose isolation over cooperation. Chen's jaw tightened. Let me be clear about what actually happened. We presented evidence of conspiracy. They ignored it. We warned of imminent attacks. They threatened to remove our ambassador. And while they played their games, their allies killed our families. Static flickered across the image. When it cleared, Chen's expression had hardened into something Elena barely recognized. Effective immediately, I am declaring a state of emergency across all human-controlled space. All vessels currently in assembly territory are ordered home. All communication with assembly species is suspended. All trade agreements are void. He paused. They think we are weak. They think we will collapse without their markets, their technology, their approval. They are wrong. The transmission crackled with interference from distant solar winds. To the assembly species monitoring this broadcast, I offer no threats and no promises. Only a warning. You taught humanity something today. You taught us that cooperation means nothing to you. That treaties are just paper. That the only language you understand is force. Chen leaned toward the camera. We are going to spend some time learning that language. And when we come back to speak with you again, you will understand every single word. The transmission ended. Elena remained at the observation window as the fleet continued its long journey home. Around her, the crew worked in subdued silence. No one spoke about what they'd lost. No one discussed what came next. But Elena was already thinking about it. Already planning. She had spent 20 years learning how the assembly worked, how its species thought, where their weaknesses lay. She had believed that knowledge would help build bridges between civilizations. Now she would use it to burn those bridges down. The first year was hardest. Assembly trade sanctions bit deep into humanity's economy. Medical supplies ran short. Luxury goods vanished entirely. Several smaller colonies nearly failed before emergency rationing measures took effect. But humans adapted. They always had. Mining operations expanded into asteroid belts that assembly species had deemed too difficult to exploit. Research programs accelerated, freed from treaty restrictions on certain technologies. Shipyards that had been building cargo vessels retooled for military production. By the end of year 2, the first new warships launched from orbital construction platforms. They were smaller than assembly capital ships, but faster and more heavily armed for their size. Human engineers had studied captured alien technology and improved on every system they found. By year 3, the assembly stopped laughing about humanity's isolation. By year 5, they stopped sending spy probes into human space. The probes stopped coming back. Elena Vasquez, no longer ambassador but now admiral of the United Earth Defense Force, watched the 7th year begin from the bridge of the battleship Remembrance. She was 50 years old, her hair shot through with gray, her eyes holding depths that made junior officers nervous. Behind her, through the massive viewport, a fleet was assembling. Ship after ship emerging from hidden construction facilities scattered across human space. Destroyers and cruisers and carriers and battleships. Weapons platforms and support vessels and troop transports. 1,200 warships. Every one of them built in secret. Every one of them crewed by volunteers who remembered New Helsinki, Prosperity Station, Bright Harbor. Who remembered 47,000 dead. Admiral. Her flag captain, a young woman named Sarah Chin, approached with a data tablet. Intelligence reports the assembly fleet has crossed into the neutral zone. 600 ships under Zathrani command. Their diplomatic fleet. Elena smiled without warmth. Coming to peacefully demand our surrender. Our scouts report they're expecting minimal resistance. Their intelligence estimates we have perhaps 200 combat-capable vessels. Then they're going to be very surprised. Elena turned from the viewport. Signal all ships. We move in 6 hours. Formation Omega. Sarah hesitated. Admiral, there are over 100,000 beings on those assembly ships. Not all of them were involved in what happened. No. Elena's voice was quiet. But their governments were. Their leaders were. And they've had 7 years to seek justice for what was done to us. 7 years to punish the conspirators, to make amends, to prove they were better than the ones who planned our destruction. She met Sarah's eyes. Did any of them even try? Sarah had no answer. Then they made their choice. Elena walked toward the command chair. Just as we made ours. Signal the fleet. Humanity is going home. And we're going to make sure every species in the galaxy remembers the lesson. The stars waited, cold and patient. And in the darkness between them, 1,000 human warships prepared for war. The reckoning and the return. Supreme Commander Thessan reviewed the tactical projections with growing confidence. 7 years of silence from human space had convinced most assembly members that Earth's defiant departure was a death sentence they'd carried out upon themselves. Without assembly trade networks, without access to advanced alien technology, without the diplomatic protections that membership provided, humanity should have withered into irrelevance. The surveillance data suggested otherwise, but Thessan had spent decades dismissing inconvenient information. Our fleet will arrive at the Kasara Nebula in 12 standard cycles. His aide, a junior Zathrani named Vorith, displayed the route on the tactical holograph. From there we can deliver our ultimatum directly to Earth's outer defenses. What ultimatum would that be precisely? Trade Minister Sorith, representing the Morati Consortium, shifted his bulk in the too small chair. The Zathrani had never bothered designing comfortable accommodations for other species. We've already taken their colonies. What more do we demand? Formal surrender. Reparations. Admission to the assembly under supervised status. Thessan's mandibles clicked in satisfaction. They will become what they always should have been. A client species. Their industrial capacity serving the collective. Their military disbanded. Their expansion contained. And if they refuse? Then our fleet demonstrates the consequences of refusal. Thessan waved one hand dismissively. 600 warships against what? Our intelligence suggests they have perhaps 200 vessels still operational, most converted civilian ships with improvised weapons. This will not be a war. It will be a correction. Vorith cleared his throat nervously. Supreme Commander, there are some anomalies in our surveillance data that perhaps. Later. Thessan cut him off. We have more important matters to discuss. Once humanity is neutralized, we must determine the distribution of their remaining territories. The Morati claim on Procyon sector is contested by the Velith hegemony. The meeting continued for another 2 hours, various species arguing over the spoils of a victory they hadn't yet achieved. None of them noticed Voritha's increasingly troubled expression as he reviewed the latest sensor readings from the human border. The readings showed nothing. Absolutely nothing. No ships, no stations, no energy signatures. It was the nothing that worried him. Admiral Elena Vasquez stood on the Bridge of Remembrance as her fleet translated out of hyperspace. The Kasara Nebula spread before them, vast clouds of ionized gas glowing in shades of purple and gold. Beautiful in its way. A fitting backdrop for what was about to happen. All ships report successful transit. Flag Captain Chin checked her displays. Assembly fleet detected bearing 073 Mark 12. Range 40,000 kilometers and closing. Formation status? Omega formation achieved. All task forces in position. Elena studied the tactical holograph. The assembly fleet was arranged in a standard defensive pattern, 600 ships spread across a wide arc. It was a formation designed to intimidate, to demonstrate overwhelming numbers. The Zithrani commander expected humanity to see those ships and immediately begin negotiating. She remembered standing in the Great Assembly Hall 7 years ago. Remembered presenting evidence of conspiracy and being called a liar. Remembered walking out while her people died on distant worlds. 47,000 dead. She carried every name in her memory, a weight she would bear until her own death. Open a channel to the assembly fleet. Channel open, Admiral. Elena straightened her uniform. Assembly vessels, this is Admiral Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Defense Force. You have entered human-controlled space without authorization. You will immediately reverse course and return to assembly territory. Static crackled. Then a familiar voice responded, translated through the communication matrix. Admiral Vasquez. Or should I say, former ambassador? Supreme Commander Thessen's tone dripped with condescension. I'm pleased to see you survived humanity's self-imposed exile. Though I confess surprised that you were given military command. Your talents seemed more suited to dramatic speeches than actual combat. My talents are varied. Elena kept her voice flat. I won't ask again. Leave now or face the consequences. Consequences. Thessan laughed, a clicking sound that the translator rendered as genuine amusement. You threatened 600 warships with your handful of converted freighters? Human arrogance never ceases to amaze. We came to offer you terms for peaceful reintegration into civilized galactic society. But if you prefer to die making empty threats, we can accommodate that as well. Elena looked at Captain Chin. Chin nodded slightly. Computer, transmit fleet registry to assembly command vessel. The data package crossed the void in seconds. Elena watched her tactical display, imagined Thessan receiving the information, imagined his compound eyes widening as the numbers registered. You're receiving accurate data on my fleet composition. Elena's voice was calm, almost conversational. 1,247 warships. 300,000 trained personnel. Weapon systems you have never encountered and cannot counter. This is what humanity built while you celebrated our supposed destruction. Silence from the assembly fleet. But numbers alone don't tell the full story. Elena continued. So let me share some additional context. Every single person serving on these ships volunteered. Not conscripted. Not required by law. They volunteered. Do you know why? More silence. Because they remember. They remember New Helsinki. They remember Prosperity Station. They remember Bright Harbor. They remember 47,000 people murdered while you sat in your assembly hall and called us liars for exposing your conspiracy. Elena stood from her command chair. 7 years ago, I told your assembly to remember that moment. I told them to remember choosing lies over truth, aggression over justice. I told them we would remember too. Her voice hardened. We have very good memories. Admiral. Thessen's voice had lost its arrogance. Perhaps we should discuss terms. There may be room for negotiation that avoids unnecessary. All ships. Elena cut him off. Execute attack pattern Theta 7. Primary targets are enemy command vessels. Secondary targets are weapons platforms and carrier groups. We are not taking prisoners. The bridge erupted into controlled chaos. Officers relayed orders. Tactical displays flickered with targeting solutions. The great warship Remembrance began to move, and around it 1,200 ships moved in perfect coordination. The assembly fleet scrambled to respond, but their formation was designed for intimidation, not combat. Ships collided trying to reposition. Communication channels flooded with panicked orders in a dozen languages. Elena watched the first salvos cross the void. Human weapons were different now. 7 years of desperate innovation had produced technologies the assembly had never imagined. Plasma torpedoes that phased through shields. Kinetic rounds accelerated to near-light velocities. Electronic warfare systems that reduced enemy targeting computers to confused static. The assembly flagship took 3 direct hits in the first exchange. Its shields collapsed. Its hull ruptured. Supreme Commander Theson's final transmission was a scream that cut off mid-syllable. Enemy command vessel destroyed. Captain Shin reported. Assembly fleet is scattering. Multiple ships attempting to retreat. No retreats. Elena's voice was ice. All ships pursue and destroy. No one leaves this system. The battle lasted 4 hours. It wasn't a battle so much as a systematic execution. Assembly ships fled in every direction, and human vessels hunted them down with methodical precision. Some surrendered, broadcasting pleas for mercy on every frequency. The human ships didn't respond to surrender signals. When it was over, the Kasara Nebula glowed with the fires of 600 destroyed vessels. Debris fields stretched across millions of kilometers. Emergency beacons pulsed from escape pods, thousands of survivors floating in the void, waiting for rescue that would come from human ships, not assembly ones. Elena allowed the escape pods to be collected. She wasn't a monster. The crews of those ships hadn't planned the attacks on human colonies, hadn't bribed witnesses, hadn't voted for sanctions based on fabricated evidence. They were soldiers following orders. But their leaders had made choices. And those choices had consequences. Admiral. Captain Shin approached with a data tablet. All enemy vessels confirmed destroyed or captured. Our losses are 17 ships with moderate damage, 2 ships destroyed. Casualty figures are still being compiled, but initial estimates suggest fewer than 300 killed. 300. Elena closed her eyes. 300 human lives. Not nothing. Never nothing. But so much less than 47,000. What are your orders regarding the prisoners? Process them according to standard protocols. Medical treatment for the wounded. Secure detention for the rest. When we reach assembly space, we'll return them. Elena opened her eyes. I want them to go home and tell everyone what they saw today. I want every species in the assembly to understand exactly what happened here. Shin nodded and departed. Elena remained on the bridge, watching the debris field expand slowly in the nebula's gravity. Somewhere in that wreckage was what remained of Thesan, the Zithrani who had dismissed her evidence and called her desperate. She felt no satisfaction in his death. No triumph. Only a cold, weary sense that justice had finally been served. Communications. She turned to her officers. Open a channel to all assembly frequencies. Maximum broadcast range. I want every ship, every station, every world in assembly space to hear this. Channel open, Admiral. Elena faced the pickup. Behind her, through the viewport, the Kasara Nebula burned. This is Admiral Elena Vasquez of the United Earth Defense Force. 7 years ago, I stood in your assembly hall and presented evidence of conspiracy against humanity. You ignored it. I warned of planned attacks against our colonies. You threatened to remove me from the chamber. And while you played your political games, 47,000 of my people died. She paused, letting the words carry across light years. Today, your diplomatic fleet entered human space. 600 warships, sent to demand our submission. They are all destroyed. Every single one. The Supreme Commander who led them is dead. The officers who commanded under him are dead. Their ships are debris, scattered across the Kasara Nebula. Static crackled across the frequencies. Elena imagined assembly leaders across the galaxy, receiving this broadcast, understanding for the first time what they faced. This is not the end. This is the beginning. For 7 years, humanity has prepared. We have built ships. We have trained crews. We have developed weapons you cannot imagine and cannot defeat. And we have remembered every single thing you did to us. She stepped closer to the pickup. I am coming for the architects of the conspiracy. I am coming for the species that bribed witnesses and forged evidence. I am coming for the governments that planned the attacks on New Helsinki, Prosperity Station, and Bright Harbor. I am coming for everyone who voted to sanction humanity while their allies murdered our families. Her voice dropped to something quiet and cold. You have 1 standard month to deliver them to neutral space for trial. Every official who participated in the conspiracy. Every officer who planned the attacks. Every politician who voted for sanctions while knowing the truth. Deliver them and this ends. Refuse and we will come for them ourselves. And this time we won't stop at your fleet. She straightened. Humanity remembers. We remember every kindness and we remember every betrayal. You chose betrayal. Now you live with the consequences. Admiral Vasquez out. The channel closed. Captain Shin returned to the bridge, her expression troubled but resolute. Admiral, fleet commanders are requesting orders for the next phase. Elena looked at the tactical display. Beyond the nebula, assembly space spread across thousands of star systems. Hundreds of species. Trillions of beings, most of whom had nothing to do with what happened to humanity. But their leaders had chosen. Their governments had chosen. And choices had consequences. Set course for the assembly border. Elena settled into her command chair. We'll give them their month. And then we'll see if they've learned anything from today. The fleet began to move, 1,200 ships burning through the void. Behind them, the Kasara Nebula glowed with funeral fires. Ahead, the stars waited, patient and cold. And somewhere on Earth, in memorial halls built to honor the dead, 47,000 names were carved in stone. New Helsinki. Prosperity Station. Bright Harbor. The names of children and parents, workers and dreamers, people who had trusted that the galaxy was civilized, that treaties meant something, that cooperation between species was possible. They had been wrong. And humanity had learned from their deaths. Learned that the only safety was strength. The only peace was the kind you could enforce. The only justice was the kind you took for yourself because no one else would give it to you. Elena Vasquez had spent 20 years believing in diplomacy. Now she believed in warships. In weapons. In the simple, terrible truth that power was the only language the galaxy understood. She had become fluent. And she was just getting started. The end.